A year ago, Jared Cannonier was in line for another title shot due to holding a split decision victory over new champion Sean Strickland. Now, after losing both of his 2024 fights, the nearly 41-year-old was instead in the gatekeeper role for this February 15, 2025 UFC Fight Night 251 main event against Gregory "RoboCop" Rodrigues. Rodrigues was an 8-time Brazilian national BJJ champion, as well as a Pan Am Games runner-up in wrestling, but he's fallen in love with the striking game to the point that none of his 7 UFC wins have come by submission. He's now known as one of the hardest pound-for-pound punchers in the sport. There's no denying his raw power, but raw is also the operative word when it comes to his striking. When he had energy, Rodrigues threw everything at full power, leaning forward on his 1-2 with his feet planted, so he's forced to generate all his power from an explosive core movement, rather than stepping into the punch for more of a whole-body approach. This takes a lot more energy, and cardio is the primary thing Rodrigues lacks. Obviously, that doesn't matter when he knocks his opponent out quickly, but that becomes increasingly difficult to rely upon as he moves up the food chain. Now in his first UFC main event, he also had to deal with the increased demands of a 5-round fight. The result was that Rodrigues quickly went from RoboCop to Rent-A-Cop. The biggest issue for Rodrigues is he cut so much weight he leaves himself really depleted. It's nice that at 6'3", Rodrigues totally dwarfed Cannonier, who unbelievably used to compete at heavyweight despite being just 5'11" in the days when he was king of Alaska. Cannonier's heart, determination, and conditioning don't show up on a tape measure, though. This was a good fight, but my general problem is Cannonier won more because he showed up prepared to go 5 hard rounds and displayed a much higher fight IQ than because he was all that impressive. Since Rodrigues only had stamina for 1 round, Cannonier merely survived the initial onslaught and then was proactive enough to keep wearing Rodrigues down until he found his moment. All credit to Cannonier for keeping the gate, but his performance isn't making anyone clamor for him to get a title shot at DDP. When you see the way he hits, you can't fault Rodrigues for trying for these quick finishes. Rodrigues fought a great first round, overcoming his limitations in athleticism, footwork, and technique to impressively drop Cannonier twice. The first knockdown was from Rodrigues' basic 1-2. Cannonier is obviously very high level, and is known to be quite durable, but it only took a couple of these basic combos to have him on his back. No one can deny Rodrigues' punching power, and if he had the stamina to do this consistently, few opponents would survive the initial onslaught, and those who did would be too damaged to mount a comeback. If Rodrigues can find a way to sustain his punching power, or figure out the right time to switch to his excellent ground game, he can certainly beat these higher-ranked fighters. He should have the skill to press his grappling advantage once his opponent is stunned, assuming he has something in the tank by that point. Cannonier simply recovered too quickly for Rodrigues to secure his back after the second knockdown, though. Rodrigues answering Cannonier taking the initiative midway through the first by attempting a single leg was smart even though Cannonier was right back up, but he didn't continue to make Cannonier think about his wrestling afterwards. The biggest issue with Rodrigues' striking style is it only really works when he's able to walk the opponent down and stop long enough to land his big combo, which is quite the tiring style. As imposing as he is when he's leading, he's not particularly threatening when his opponent is pressuring him. He doesn't have the speed and footwork to create, and he needs the proper distance to throw power behind his jab. In fairness, Rodrigues' second knockdown did come when he intercepted an overhand right with a short right hook, but this was timing and location when Cannonier decided to try to hold his ground, rather than a repeatable strategy. RoboCop was definitely showing 21st century manufacturing, malfunctioning after 5 minutes. Cannonier is well known to have a good chin and great recovery time, so it was no surprise when he came on after Rodrigues failed to finish him. Cannonier just focused on wearing Rodrigues out after this, working the clinch against the cage to finish the first, and taking the initiative with forward pressure at the start of the second. Cannonier obviously knew he had to put Rodrigues on the defensive, and Rodrigues has some real defensive liabilities. He didn't even have the energy to keep his hands up on the takeback after round 1, and he's not exactly going to be ducking and dodging strikes like Yuri Prochazka, because he doesn't have the speed and athleticism for that, even when he's fresh. Rodrigues didn't start throwing again until the middle of the second. He was eventually able to reestablish his jab, but he wasn't throwing much behind it, and Cannonier was landing his counter to the head above Rodrigues' low hands. Rodrigues was lumbering around in the final 2 rounds, and was now largely just using his arms to punch. His shots were much slower, so they were easy for Cannonier to avoid, and regularly coming up short regardless. Cannonier was able to utilize some movement and angles now that Rodrigues was more content to stand around, popping the jab while stepping off the center line to the right. Cannonier didn't apply as much forward pressure in the third, and Rodrigues looked a little better after taking the second off. As long as Cannonier wasn't being proactive enough to back him up, Rodrigues kept putting the jab out to keep him at bay. He wasn't following it up with big power like in the first round, but keeping distance and touching Cannonier was doing a better job of staying within himself while getting back to scoring some points. Rodrigues was throwing about 70 strikes a round, but already surpassed his career high in significant strikes with a minute left in the third, since most of his fights were over long before that. Round 3 was the best in terms of being a competitive back and forth round where both had their moments. Rodrigues was showing even less footwork and explosion though. His single leg was easily defended, and when he got inside to try to clinch, Cannonier dropped him with a right elbow that sliced Rodrigues' cheek. There were only 18 seconds left, so Herb Dean allowed Rodrigues to survive, but Rodrigues was in no hurry to get up. Even after waiting about as long as he could get away with, Rodrigues didn't stand without wobbling. Dean or his corner probably should have called the fight in between rounds. Rodrigues didn't recover at all, and showed no ability to move to defend himself in the brief fourth round. He was quickly backed into the cage by Cannonier's hooks, and just stood there, allowing Cannonier to pick him apart with right hooks until the stoppage 21 seconds in. This is an early candidate for comeback of the year. It was a good match that by earning fight of the night was Cannonier's 8th bonus in 19 UFC fights.